Number 15. The Vampire Clan. 16-year-old Rod Farrell was obsessed with dark subjects, specifically vampires. Nothing out of the ordinary for your everyday gothic teenager. Farrell took things to a whole new level though, by declaring that he was literally a 500-year-old vampire by the name of Vesigo. Farrell spent some time living in Estes, Florida. This is where he met Heather Wendorf at school. Wendorf was drawn to Farrell and had a fascination for the vampire clan that he claimed to lead back home in Kentucky. Wendorf and Farrell performed rituals in which they would drink each other's blood. After Farrell moved back to Kentucky, Wendorf told him that she was miserable at home, to which Farrell came up with a plan to get Wendorf away from her so-called miserable home life. On November 25, 1996, Farrell and his vampire clan, which consisted of Scott Anderson and 2 teenage girls, drove to Wendorf's home in Florida. The 2 girls took Wendorf to see her at the time boyfriend to say goodbye. During that time, Farrell and Anderson walked into the house with a crowbar and beat Wendorf's father, 49-year-old Richard, to death as he lay asleep on the couch. The 2 claimed that they had no plan to hurt Wendorf's mother, 54-year-old Ruth. However, she threw hot coffee onto Farrell, which angered him and caused him to beat the unarmed woman to death. He then proceeded to carve his symbol, a V, into Richard's body before stealing his car to meet up with the girls. Heather's sister found the bodies when she returned home from work that night. The vampire clan drove to New Orleans after the vicious murders, but they quickly ran out of money. When one of the girls called her mother to ask for cash, the police quickly tracked down the clan. Everyone involved confessed to the crimes, aside from Wendorf. Farrell was given a death sentence, making him the youngest person on death row at the time, but his sentence was later reduced to life in prison. Heather Wendorf was acquitted of involvement in the crimes after a grand jury found she did not know what Farrell intended to do. Number 14. Black Jesus. Stephen Terry began studying to be a Lutheran minister before eventually abandoning that calling. However, it's unclear whether he chose to leave the school or if he was kicked out. He traveled deep into the mountains of New Guinea, where he started his own religion and began referring to himself as Black Jesus. The cult managed to grow to a massive 6,000 members, despite the controversial use of what were referred to as flower girls, but were actually specially chosen young girls who served as types of sex slaves to Terry and other cult leaders. Terry claimed to have about 430 of them at one time. In October 2006, Terry and other leading members of his cult were involved in a ceremony. 13-year-old Rita Herman, whose mother had offered her to the cult for use, became the star of the ceremony. Terry raped Rita before stabbing her to death. Terry and Rita's mother also allegedly ate Rita's flesh and drank her blood. A year later, in October 2007, a set of villagers decided that they had enough of the cult's strange ways. They attacked Terry, beat him, and carried him out into the jungle, tied to a log, before handing him to the police. Terry was convicted of 4 counts of rape, but was never charged with murder. However, on March 21, 2013, Terry and roughly 49 other inmates escaped from the prison they were in. 5 months later of the same year, in August, Terry was hiding in a small village named Gal. There he apparently murdered a 5-year-old girl and attempted to kill another teenage girl. This time, the villagers had a different plan to finally rid themselves of Terry. On August 29th, they attacked Terry and a 15-year-old follower of his. They hacked and slashed at him, castrated him, and then buried him in a pit in the jungle. Number 13. Carny Cult. William Anthony Alt was working with a U.S. traveling carnival in 1991. He came to find that his co-workers, Jimmy Pennick, Mark Goodwin, and brothers Keith and David Lawrence were involved in a satanic cult, and he immediately wanted in. The cult, however, rejected him, and Alt turned to blackmail. He knew about the murder of an 18-year-old boy in Georgia that was committed by Pennick and Keith Lawrence earlier that year. Alt swore that he was going to report the murder to the police if they did not let him in the cult. However, the members had a different plan for Alt. On September 25th, 1991, after the carnival closed for the night, the 5 men were driven to a secluded area and Alt was asked to lie on a makeshift altar. The 4 cult members tied and gagged him. Keith Lawrence spoke a prayer to Satan, then Panic picked up a knife and cut Alt from his neck to his stomach. The men then took turns cutting his stomach, abdomen, chest to make an inverted cross. Panic then asked Alt if he was ready to die. He slit his throat without answer. They then cut off Alt's head and hands, burned him, and threw the remainder of his body in an open field. They took what money Alt had on him and went to a local Arby's. Mark Goodwin's father called in a tip to the police, and the cult was arrested shortly after. Panic was given a 60-year sentence, Keith Lawrence was given 20 years, and David Lawrence and Goodwin were both given 8 years. When asked about their satanic connections, Keith Lawrence said that Satanism was like a drug. You get high, and once you're over it, you got to inject even more than the first time. Number 12. The Ripper Crew. There was a string of rapes and murders in the city of Chicago that sparked in May 1981. It began with the disappearance of 28-year-old Linda Sutton. 10 days after she went missing, she was found raped and stabbed to death. Her left breast had been cut off. All 18 victims that followed her had their left breast removed. It was later found that the series of crimes were being acted out by a group of 4 young men that became referred to as the Ripper Crew or the Chicago Rippers. The cult-like gang was led by a former John Wayne Gacy employee named Robin Gett. The 3 other members were Edward Spreitzer and a set of brothers, Andrew and Thomas Kakorizalais. The crew would travel around the city in a van and lure or kidnap women. They took every victim back to Gett's apartment, where they would sacrifice them by raping them, removing the left breast using piano wire, and then finishing the task of killing them outright. They would all allegedly masturbate on the breast before cutting it up and eating it. All of this was done while Gett read out loud from the Satanic Bible. The group kidnapped a prostitute named Beverly Washington. Before their sting of crimes came to an end, the crew raped her, stabbed her, removed her breast, and dumped her body by railroad tracks. Washington somehow survived the attack and gave the police the description of the 4 men, as well as their van. 3 of the members confessed to their crimes, except for their leader, Robin Gett. As a result of this, he was not charged with murder, but given 120 years in prison for his attack on Washington. Thomas Kakorizalais was given 70 years. Edward Spreitzer and Andrew Kakorizalais was given death sentences. Spreitzer had his sentence commuted to life, while Andrew Kakorizalais was executed on March 17, 1999. Number 11. The Russian Teen Satanic Cult. In the small Russian town of Yaroslavl, a group of teenagers started sacrificing small animals to Satan. This tiny cult was led by Nikolai Okolobiak in the mid-2000s. Things began to escalate quickly after one member claimed that his life got better and better each time he prayed to Satan. By June 2008, the cult had about 11 members, all aged 17 to 19. The members told their parents they were going to a music festival, but instead, over the course of 2 nights, the cult lured 4 young teens to a local forest. In this dark forest, they got the younger teens forcibly drunk and then brutally attacked them. The members claim that each person was stabbed 666 times, that they all partook in cannibalistic acts and then dismembered the bodies and threw them into a pit with satanic markings on it. About 2 months later, the bodies of the victims were discovered by the local police. 6 cult members were charged for the crimes. Ogolobiak, the popular leader, got the longest sentence of 20 years. A 7th member was deemed unfit for trial. He instead was sent in for psychiatric treatment. Number 10. The Order of the Solar Temple. What started as nothing more than a small religious movement that was founded in Geneva in 1984 became a symbol of mass murder-suicide of its 74 members over the span of 3 years in the late 90s. The cult was founded by Luc Joret and Joseph de Membro. The headquarters was later moved to Zurich, where a leadership council of 33 members presided, and regional lodges were set up to perform initiation ceremonies and other rites in Switzerland, Canada, and elsewhere. In October 1994, a member's 3-month-old son was stabbed repeatedly with a wooden stake at the instruction of Joseph de Membro. De Membro forced this because he identified the baby as the Antichrist described in the Bible. He believed that the Antichrist was born in order to prevent de Membro from succeeding in his spiritual aim. A few days later, the cult had a ceremonial Last Supper before committing mass suicide. 15 Inner Circle members committed suicide with poison, 30 were killed by bullets or smothering, and 8 others were killed by other causes. In Switzerland, many of the victims were found in a secret underground chapel lined with mirrors and other items of Templar symbolism. The bodies were dressed in the order's ceremonial robes and were in a circle, feet together, head outwards, most with plastic bags tied over their heads. They had each been shot in the head. Specialists say that the plastic bags were used to symbolize the environmental downfall of the world that was being brought on by citizens and big companies. Other victims were found in 3 ski chalets. Several dead children were lying together. The tragedy was discovered when officers rushed to the sites to fight the fires that had been ignited by remote control devices. Farewell letters left by the believers stated that they believed they were leaving to escape the hypocrisies and oppression of this world. Another incident related to the OTS took place in December 1995, when 16 bodies were discovered in a star formation in the Vaucluse Mountains of France. It was found later that 2 of them shot the others, then committed suicide by firearm and immolation. Michel Tabachnik, an internationally known musician, was arrested. He was allegedly one of the cult leaders. He was convicted with the charge of participation in a criminal organization and murder. His case was later appealed and he was set free. Number 9. The Order of 9 Angels. Sometimes referred to as ONA or O9A, this cult represents Satanism to an extreme level. The cult first attracted attention in the 80s and 90s after being featured in a book. ONA originally rose in the United Kingdom but has spread to certain parts of North and South America, as well as some European countries. The ONA has its own interpretation of Satanism that describes it as a personal journey that you must take on your own to grow and become closer to Satan. The ONA is said to still be a practicing cult today, and even recently featured in a Vice special. It's alleged that the ONA encourages murder, incest, criminal activity, human sacrifice, rape, and other hideous acts. Perhaps the key element that makes this cult so dangerous is that they have steered away from the common belief of using willing human sacrifices and instead use unwilling victims. Another satanic cult known as the Temple of Set have even gone to the extent of banning its members from the association with the Order of 9 Angels due to the latter views on and advocation of human sacrifice. Many Satanist groups believe ONA to be a dangerous, violent, thirsty group that is giving Satanism a bad name. Number 8. Superior Universal Alignment Cult. Started in 1989 in the town of Alamira, Brazil, young boys began to go missing. The disappearances continued for the next 4 years, and it is estimated that 19 boys disappeared. The boys were all aged 15 or younger. They were castrated with medical expertise, then left to die in the jungle. Only 6 bodies were ever found, and another 5 boys were lucky enough to escape the jungle to go to the police. There was no action by the law until 2003. Then they were finally able to set charges against the Superior Universal Alignment Cult. This cult was led by a woman in her 70s named Valentina de Andre. Other cult members included a doctor, businessman, and a policeman. They had all used their high status to avoid conviction for some time. After they were finally charged, the 3 men were given sentences which ranged from 32 to 77 years. Yet, surprisingly, Valentina was acquitted of the murders. The cult believed that children born after 1981 were evil and needed to be exterminated. They also believed that the world was going to end and that a spaceship would soon arrive to take them to another planet. Number 7. Heaven's Gate. A UFO cult group based in San Diego, California, founded in the early 1970s and led by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, led to yet another cult-related mass suicide. In mid-March of 1997, Applewhite recorded himself talking about mass suicide and stated that it was the only way to evacuate this Earth. Applewhite claimed that a spaceship was trailing comet Hale-Bopp that would take them all to another level of existence if they killed themselves. About 38 of his followers committed suicide so that their souls could board the apparent spacecraft. This and other UFO-related beliefs held by the group had led to some observers to characterize the group as a type of UFO religion. In October 1996, before their deaths, the group purchased alien abduction insurance to cover up to 50 members at the cost of $10,000. The 38 members plus Applewhite had been living in a rented building located in a gated community of upscale homes in the San Diego area. The members took phenobarbital mixed with applesauce, washed down with vodka. Additionally, they secured plastic bags around their heads after ingesting the mix to induce asphyxiation. Authorities found the dead lying neatly in their own bunk beds, faces and torsos covered by a square purple cloth. Each member carried a $5 bill and 3 quarters in their pockets, said to be for the interplanetary toll. All 39 were dressed in athletic shoes and armband patches reading Heaven's Gate Away Team, one of the many instances of the group's use of the Star Trek fictional universe's nomenclature. The adherents between the ages of 26 and 72 are believed to have died in 3 groups over 3 successive days, with remaining participants cleaning up after each group's prior death. 15 members died on March 24th, 15 more on March 25th, and 9 on March 26th. Leader Applewhite was the 3rd to last member to die. 2 women remained after him and were the only ones found without bags over their heads. Among the dead was Thomas Nichols, brother of the actress Nichelle Nichols, who is best known for her role as Yura in the original Star Trek television series. Only one of the group's members, Rio de Angelo, Richard Ford, did not kill himself. He videotaped the mansion in Rancho Santa Fe. The tape was not shown to the police until 2002, 5 years after the event. However, the tapes of Applewhite are accessible on YouTube.
Classroom, or in old language, a couple thousand years ago,
disciples.
Those who are trying to
Prepare themselves
for entry into the evolutionary level,
above human,
synonymous with the kingdom of God, the kingdom
of heaven.
We're going to talk to you about
The most urgent thing that is on our mind.
Number 6. The Santa Muerte Cult. In Mexican culture, Santa Muerte, or Saint of Death, is the personification of death and helps people on their journey into the afterlife. She is often depicted as a skeleton in a vibrant gown and is used to remind people of their mortality and of loved ones that they have lost. Those that worship her bring offerings of candy, beads, incense, and other goodies to her statue. However, there was one small cult in Sonora province that took things above and beyond as far as offerings go. In July 2010, a 10-year-old boy named Martin Rios disappeared. Shortly thereafter, 10-year-old Jesus Martinez also went missing. Both boys were known for often visiting Jesus's grandmother's house. The police had already suspected Sylvia Mieres because of the parade of people visiting her home. They thought she may have been running a whorehouse. When a 55-year-old woman disappeared, the police finally searched the property. It was not long into the search before the police discovered the bodies of the 2 missing boys on under the floorboards and one buried in the backyard. The missing 55-year-old woman was also found at a different location. However, all 3 had been murdered by a Santa Muerte cult led by the 44-year-old Sylvia. The cult consisted of 8 members, and they were all relatives of Sylvia. They were all arrested and charged for the murders. The victims' wrists and throats were slashed on an altar at night around candles. Their blood was drained and collected in bowls before being poured around the altar in a sacrifice to Saint Death. Number 5. The Manson Family. This mid-sized cult that arose in the California desert in the late 1960s. Charles Manson, the infamous leader of the Manson Family cult, believed in a race war that he referred to as Helter Skelter, taken from the popular Beatles song. Manson believed that the numerous murders he and his followers committed would help precipitate that war. Though there were many small-scale crimes committed by the Manson family, there are 4 crimes that have been highlighted in their background. The Crow shooting. In June 1969, Manson was telling the family they might have to show the black community how to be the ones that initiate Helter Skelter, as this was the supposed plan. Manson gave the task to a member of the family by the name of Charles Watson. Watson defrauded a drug dealer named Bernard Crow. Crow responded by threatening to wipe out the Manson family. Manson countered on July 1st, 1969 by shooting Crow at his Hollywood apartment. Hinman murder. In July 1969, Manson sent 3 of the family members to an acquaintance, Gary Hinman's house, in an attempt to receive money from him that Manson believed he inherited. The 3 members held Hinman hostage for 2 days. During this time, Manson showed up with a sword to slash his ear. After that, a member stabbed Hinman to death, allegedly on Manson's instruction. Before leaving the Topagana Canyon residence, one of the members used Hinman's blood to write "Political Piggy" on the wall and to draw a panther paw, a Black Panther symbol. The Tate murder, perhaps the most notorious of all of the Manson murders. On the night of August 8, 1969, Manson instructed a few family members to go to the Tate home, where a former acquaintance of theirs once lived. He gave explicit instructions to totally destroy everyone there as gruesome as possible. 4 of Charles Manson's followers, Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Renwinkle, and Linda Kasabian, murdered everyone in the home that night in a bloody mess of pure evil. Sharon Tate, the homeowner, was several months pregnant when the Manson family took her life, as well as the life of her unborn child, in cold blood. Tate allegedly begged the killers to spare the life of her unborn child, and they only responded that they did not care about her or her baby. On the front door of the home, the word pig was written in Sharon Tate's blood, an obvious reference to the white establishment that Charles Manson clearly thought was represented by Sharon Tate. La Bianca's murders. The night directly following the Tate murders, Charles Manson himself, Tex Watson, as well as Renwinkle and Leslie Van Houten went to the Lost Vets home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca and tied them up with buckskin thongs. Leno was found with 12 knife wounds and 14 additional wounds caused by a large fork. The word war was carved into his flesh with a knife. When police arrived, the fork was found still sticking out from his throat. Rosemary was found in her bedroom with a bloody pillowcase pulled over her head and a lamp cord tied around her throat. She was stabbed a total of 41 times in the area of the back and rear. The words "Death to Pigs" and "Rise" were written on the walls in the blood of these victims. Charles Manson was finally arrested on October 12, 1969 at the Barker Ranch, the second of the Manson family ranches. The state of California ironically abolished the death penalty just before the Manson trials began, and therefore Charles Manson and the 4 family members were spared such a penalty. The murderers are still rotting in jail to this day, with Manson spending his time at the Corcoran State Prison just north of Los Angeles. Number 4. The Fall Rivers Cult. This cult operated in Massachusetts in the late 70s and was led by 25-year-old Carl Drew. Drew was a pimp who used Satanism to terrify the prostitutes who worked for him. He claimed to be the son of Satan himself. This cult may have had up to 10 members, all of them associated with the Fall River sex trade. Between 1979 and 1980, the group held numerous ceremonies deep in the local woods. During these seances, it has been reported that Drew would speak in a different voice and a different language, in an almost inhuman way. These rituals started with nothing more than sex and drugs. However, these things took a wicked turn when Drew declared that they needed to perform a human sacrifice to please his father Satan. The cult's first victim was a 19-year-old prostitute named Donna Levesque. Her hands were bound behind her and her head was beaten with a large rock. The cult dumped Donna's body under the bleachers of a local high school. She was found on October 13, 1979. The second murder that was linked to the cult was that of Barbara Reupload. Although there is no accurate date for the crime, her body was found in November 1979. She was found on a pile of stones that resembled a makeshift altar. Her hands were bound and her skull had been crushed. 22-year-old Karen Martson was the cult's third victim. Killed in February of 1980, Martson had been there the night of Levesque's murder and had been scared into going to the police. After that, her head was beaten in with a rock, and Drew broke her neck with his bare hands. A devoted cult member, Robin Murphy, reported that Drew handed her a knife and forced her to slit Martson's throat. Drew then cut an X into Martson's chest and used her blood to mark an X on Murphy's forehead. After this ordeal, Drew began kicking and pulling at Martson's head until it came off of her body. After Martson's death, the cult was arrested. 2 members, including Carl Drew, were given life sentences. Robin Murphy testified against the rest of the cult members and was given a lighter sentence. The judge also allowed her to apply for parole after 20 years. In 2004, Murphy was released, but was caught violating her parole and sent back to prison a year later. In March 2012, Murphy recanted her statement while applying for another parole. She claimed to have lied about the whole thing. However, many who worked on the investigation believe she was actually one of the masterminds behind the crimes. Number 3. Jeffrey Lundgren Farm Cult. Jeffrey Lundgren had a simple beginning as a minister with the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or RLDS for short, which was a relatively large off-branch of the mainstream Latter-day Saint organization that are also referred to as Mormons. Lundgren became a lay minister with the church in 1984 and quickly attracted followers. However, he soon began to worry the leaders of the church with his strange actions and habits. Lundgren claimed to have discovered a better way to interpret the scripture, and his radical views forced the officials to remove him from the church. After the tragic blow of losing his spot in the church, Lundgren moved his wife and their 4 kids onto a farm he rented in Ohio. He began a cult that featured about 20 people, and Lundgren was the ruler of all of them. His followers were forced to give their paychecks and participate in mandatory weapons training for some unknown reason. To keep his powers strong, Lundgren listened in on phone calls and would not allow cult members to talk to one another. Lundgren soon took things to a new level and told the women of the cult they would reach salvation through sexual acts. He convinced them to dance naked for hours while he masturbated. The Avery family, Dennis and Cheryl, had been strongly opposed to the RLDS's 1984 decision to allow women to become ministers. Lundgren's ways intrigued them so much that they quit their jobs, sold their home, and moved to Ohio. The Averys were not in there very long, however, before they realized they were unhappy and they planned to leave the cult. Lundgren had an idea that was going to happen and immediately took Dennis Avery into town, where he forced him to buy 2 handguns and a carbine. The next day he had the Averys visit the farm for dinner. After the meal, Lundgren and another cult member named Ron Luff lured them to the barn. It's reported that in the barn, Luff ran a chainsaw to mask the sound of gunshots. 2 days after the murders, the cult fled the farm. The bodies weren't found until early January. By this time, the cult had already fallen apart. However, Lundgren and 13 members of the cult were eventually caught and charged with the Avery murders. Lundgren told jurors at his trial that he was a prophet of God and not worthy of the death penalty. The jurors disagreed and sentenced him to death. As a last desperate resort, Lundgren pled with the jury, claiming he was too fat to be executed. He was executed by lethal injection on October 24th, 2006. Number 2. Children of Thunder. Brothers Taylor, formerly named Glenn, and Justin Heltzer were part of a Mormon family. The pair stayed very active in their church for most of their lives. They both completed 2 years of missionary work. Taylor began to dislike religious life as he aged into his 20s and was eventually kicked out of the church for drinking, doing drugs, and having premarital sexual affairs. Just before Taylor's expulsion from the school, he and his brother had met Don Goodman. In 1999, at a Mormon murder mystery, Dawn began dating Justin, even though she seemed to be obsessed with Taylor. Shortly after meeting the young girl, Taylor started claiming that God was speaking to him and would shush people in order to hear what the Lord was saying. Taylor started making claims that God gave him a new plan for a religious movement. Taylor needed to raise money for this newfound religious movement, so he started pimping out women and selling drugs to get the money up. However, the plan failed him, and he resorted to theft. At the time, Justin was a stockbroker, and Taylor asked him for a list of targets. To aid his theft venture, Taylor began dating 22-year-old Selena Bishop in the spring of 2000. Taylor lied to Bishop and told her that his name was Jordan, and he was unable to give out a last name for personal reasons. He also wouldn't tell her where he lived and wouldn't meet her friends and family. The only person to see him with Selena was her mother, who saw them together twice. In July of 2000, the now named Children of Thunder went to the home of an 85-year-old man named Ivan Steinman and his wife Annette. The couple had been married for 55 years and had been clients of Justin's. The cult forced the Steinmans to drink Rufinol before taking them to the brothers' house and making them write out 2 checks, totaling out to $100,000. Don Goodman went to the bank in a horrible disguise of a wheelchair and a giant cowboy hat and attempted to deposit the money into an account Taylor had created. The bank was very suspicious though, and Don left with no money, no checks. Meanwhile, at a brother's house, the elderly couple was not dying from the Rufinol, and the brothers had to find another way to kill them. Justin slammed Ivan's head into the bathroom floor until he died, and Taylor slit Annette's throat. They then dismembered the bodies with an electric saw and prayed over them. The next victim of the Children of Thunder was Selena. Taylor brought her to the house and invited her to lie on the floor for a massage. Justin then entered the room and beat her head with a hammer. They brought her upstairs to dismember her, but found she was still alive, so Taylor slit her throat and they proceeded to cut her body up. They stuffed the parts of all 3 victims into gym bags and threw them into the river. 2 days after the murder, Taylor realized that Selena's mother might be able to tie him to her, so he went to her apartment and shot her and a friend while they were sleeping in bed. It didn't take long for the 5 victims to be reported missing, and the trio was quickly arrested. Goodman testified against the evil brothers, and Justin was given a life in prison without parole. Taylor was given the death penalty. In 2010, Taylor attempted suicide with pens and pencils by shoving them into his eye sockets. He only ended up blinding himself. 3 years later, Taylor was more successful when he hung himself with his bed sheets. Number 1. The People's Temple. Often shortened to just the People's Temple. This cult began in 1955 by founder Jim Jones, and by the 70s the cult had a following that included over a dozen locations in California, including its headquarters in San Francisco. Jones was an ordained Christian pastor who had professed atheism. In 1974, Jones convinced most of his followers to move to Guinea in South America. The community created on this property was called the People's Temple Agricultural Project, or informally, Jonestown. It had as few as 50 residents in early 1977. However, Jonestown grew to have about 900 members by 1978. Jones promised those that moved there they would be in complete paradise and away from the wickedness of the outside world. On November 17, 1978, Leo Ryan, a congressman from the San Francisco area, was investigating claims of abuse within the People's Temple, visited Jonestown. During this visit, many cult members expressed that they wanted to leave but feared the consequences. The congressman agreed to help a few people flee the cult town. They headed for the airport, but they were intercepted by temple security guards who opened fire on the group, killing Congressman Ryan, 3 journalists, and one of the temple defectors. As Jones feared this would lead to a loss of followers or a possible consequence from the law, he ordered his congregation to drink a concoction of cyanide-laced grape-flavored Kool-Aid. This mass suicide totaled in 918 deaths, 276 of which were children.
Take our life from us. We laid it down. We got tired. We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world.
Got an idea for a top 15 list? Submit it at top15s.net/submit. Be sure to subscribe for future videos. Thanks for watching.